Hey Michigan fans, Keith here from Lewis Jewelers, and we are super excited to be able to cheer on all the student athletes that will be on the field and the courts this season. But just like Michigan sports, special moments have not been canceled. Come into Lewis Jewelers or visit lewisjewelers.com so our team can help you celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, or your just because moments. Go Blue!
Lewis Jewelers, celebrate the moments.
Welcome to the Wolverine.com podcast. I am Clayton Sayfie with Austin Fox. This is the Maize and Blue Breakdown for this week. Michigan football, obviously coming off of a disappointing 27-24 loss to Michigan State, the in-state rival. Michigan was a 21-point favorite right at kickoff, and it had an odd feel right from the kick. We'll break down that game. We'll quickly recap it before we move on to Indiana and talk about what we expect from Michigan and Indiana this weekend down in Bloomington. We will get a quick Big Ten power rankings. Those have returned. Now that we're through 2 weeks, we feel like we can evaluate some of these teams, give you our power rankings. We'll make some college football picks, and then we'll do some over-unders at the end. Austin Fox, let's start with this Michigan State game. Let's get it out of the way. Let's talk about some things that we didn't like before we get into maybe a few positives. So first of all, I guess, what were some of the biggest things in your mind that weren't there for Michigan, I guess, in this loss to Michigan State, and that were the reasons why they fell as such big favorites?
There's so many things you could point to in this game last weekend. What bugged me, perhaps more than anything, is the fact that Michigan just comes out flat as can be and with no intensity or emotion in a rivalry game, and we've seen that too often under Jim Harbaugh. Both you and I were talking about before this podcast, but in recent years, it seems like this Michigan team needs a wake-up call early in the year. It was Wisconsin last year, at Notre Dame in 2018 to a lesser degree, but I just don't understand why they need these early season wake-up calls. It's like the mentality just isn't there sometimes, and they're mentally weak at times, and that's a reflection of the coaching staff. It's like, what are these guys teaching these players and saying to these players all week? They obviously weren't very prepared on either side of the ball. I know the final offensive numbers looked pretty decent in some respects. Michigan finished with 452 yards, but anyone who watched that game knows that that was not a good Michigan offense. They had absolutely no ground game between the tackles whatsoever, and when they would run to the outside, it worked, but they didn't do it very often. So that's a reflection of coaching. Joe Milton, coming into the year, a lot of people thought that if Michigan were to struggle on offense, he would be the reason why, but he was the least of Michigan's worries on Saturday. The offensive line regressed in a big way. You can make the case that all five starters played poorly. Chuck Filiaga, the redshirt junior at left guard, had one of the worst games of any offensive lineman that Chris Ballas, our coworker, has ever seen, and he's been covering this team for about 25 years or so. So it just makes you wonder what this team was doing all week in practice. Defensively, they obviously had no idea how to stop Michigan State. The secondary was torched all game long. Jamon Green and Vincent Gray at cornerback, Michigan's redshirt sophomore duo, struggled mightily. MSU's receivers constantly had a step on them and burned them all game long. Ricky White, the freshman MSU receiver, finished with 196 yards in his second collegiate game, and that's after he poured in 10 or 20 receiving yards in the opener. So it just really boggles your mind how poorly this Michigan team played on Saturday. But again, the mentality is perhaps what bugged me most, and how flat and the lack of energy they showed on Saturday. That's what's most concerning to me.
I agree with you. That was going to be my first point. You know, this was a rivalry game. Michigan players said all the right things. We talked to them on Monday. They had Zoom meetings with the media on Tuesday. You heard all the right things about how they're not going to overlook this team. Jim Harbaugh was saying all the right things in his media availability, basically talking about how Michigan State is a good and talented team. You know, they turned it over 7 times. They're not going to turn it over 7 times against us. So we have to win in another way, basically. And then you just saw none of it. And you mentioned some of the energy, maybe the intensity that was lacking. It's clear as day that it was lacking. There was a clip that went around on Twitter. Joe Milton picks up a 3rd down conversion with his legs right on Michigan's sideline. And he gets up, and there's not one person. You can see on the TV shot that there's not one person cheering, patting him on the helmet. Nobody that was on the field, nobody that was on the sideline, none of his teammates or even, to be honest, coaches over there. Maybe Ben Herbert, but he wasn't in the shot. That guy's always going crazy, but he's got to get those guys going crazy on the sideline. I mean, you look at Ohio State and the way that they have their guys going before the game when they do their little thing. I don't even know how to explain it, with the arms go up, down, that type of thing before the game. That's led by their strength coach, and then the strength coach is super involved on the sideline getting those guys going. It shouldn't be forced, though, to be honest. So it's hard to really even pinpoint where that even comes from, but that's my number one point with the things I didn't like, because that really impacted the rest of the game as well. And we don't want to harp on too much on this game because we're here to preview the next game against Indiana, but there were questionable calls. The Hassan Haskins Wildcat gets a lot of the fanfare, I guess you could say. A lot of people are going after that. I thought there were worse signs. I mean, the rotation of the running backs in general, when you have Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins, and really Hassan Haskins is the best back on the day, but those were the hot hands. Corum had your 2 touchdowns. Haskins had the 1 late. That was bad. Running between the tackles and being adamant about staying in between the tackles. You mentioned how bad it was, but the fact that they kept going back to it is even worse. Outside of the tackles, they ran 16 times for 109 yards. That's an average of 6.8 yards per carry. Also scored all 3 of their touchdowns on the outside. Inside the tackles, 9 times for 5 yards. And 9 times was probably 8 too many once you see you couldn't do it there. So offensively, I hated some of the things they did. I hated some of the lack of adjustments that Michigan's offense made. And you mentioned it, it's on the coaching staff at that point. I think a lot of this was on the staff. At the same time, the players were flat, and, we don't know what goes on in the building throughout the week to a great degree. Maybe the coaching staff was saying the right thing. Maybe the players just had an overconfidence to them. I don't know. Something was off, though, from the beginning. And then, basically Michigan State clogging the middle and not making the adjustments to go to the edge is just another thing. Why would you beat a dead horse going inside? I don't know. A lot of things were off. The defense, you mentioned the cornerback play. It was bad. They had no pressure, no pass rush when you have Aiden Hutchinson and Kwity Paye. MSU was max protecting, but Michigan was blitzing. So it wasn't like the numbers game was way off at the line of scrimmage. Nobody won a one-on-one battle. I feel like off the top of my head, I can just list a million things that went wrong in this game, and that adds up to a 3-point loss. I know Michigan scored late, so you could maybe say that was more of a 10-point game, but I do have to say hats off to Michigan State, right? I mean, Mel Tucker comes in. They look horrible in week 1. A lot of that was due to the turnovers, but give him credit for coming into Michigan Stadium, I guess, kind of Michigan Stadium, no atmosphere, in winning that game, though. And again, just as much credit Mel Tucker gets for winning that game, I put just as much blame on the Michigan side of things for losing that game, because it never should have happened.
The Michigan players deserve a ton of blame for this one, but at the same time, I think the coaching staff deserves more. It's up to Jim Harbaugh and these guys to get these guys ready to play every Saturday, and it was obvious they didn't do that. What's that tell you when a first-year Michigan State head coach and Mel Tucker, who is expected to have a terrible team in year 1, can outcoach Jim Harbaugh in what was his first victory as an MSU head coach? That just baffles me. I don't think anybody predicted this one. In a million years, whatever happened, Michigan was favored by 24.5 coming in, and everybody was projecting a blowout, even people on the Michigan State side of things. So the fact that MSU somehow pulled this one out was just very surprising. I just can't get over the fact of how flat Michigan played, and there's really not much more to say about this one that hasn't already been said over the past week.
Yeah. So that being said, the last thing we'll do, I did want to mention a few things I like to see, because this is game 2. Every team in the country is still, especially in a unique year like this, evolving and growing, and you hope at least that, Michigan is doing the same thing and they're not going to collapse, right? But some things that I did like from this game, starting with Joe Milton, like you mentioned, he was the least of Michigan's concerns out there. I thought he got better as well as the game went on. He had some happy feet early. He admitted that post-game. He actually diagnosed what happened in the game pretty well post-game. and I think that's a good sign as well. But you could actually see it in his play that he was making his adjustments. I mean, Joe Milton made adjustments in this game more so than the Michigan coaching staff did. So in terms of positives, I think that Joe Milton he understands the game, as we've kind of heard throughout the summer, that he's really improved his mental aspect of the game. But you could tell some of the things he was doing in the second half were better, and were based on what he saw and some of the looks he was seeing in the first half. So credit to him for that. One of his receivers, freshman Roman Wilson, I mean, I like that. I like what he was able to do, and I think he's shown throughout the first 2 weeks that he's kind of a mainstay in this offense. He had 5 receptions for 71 yards. 3 of those went for first downs. Giles Jackson, 5 of his 7 receptions for his 58 yards were first downs. So you like what those two brought. I thought those two were the best 2 receivers and have kind of proven to be. I know Giles Jackson looked a little more healthy in week 2. But, man, what'd you like? I mean, I like Adam Shibley on the defensive end of things, coming in and playing really well in replacement of Cam McGrone, really stuffing the run. And I think McGrone's really struggled early in the season. I know he's banged up. So what'd you like? Give me 1 or 2 things. Give the people 1 or 2 things that we can talk about that we did like, because it's a shortened season, but it's still a long season in the aspect that, there's some things to build on here.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of positives, but one of the few for me was the play of the freshman. You talked about Roman Wilson. He had 71 receiving yards on Saturday, and that was the second most ever for a freshman receiver under Jim Harbaugh in a game at Michigan. The only one who had more was Tariq Black when he had 83 against Florida in 2017. So Roman Wilson is turning into Michigan's best receiver. I don't think it's too early to say that. Blake Corum was another positive, the speedster at running back. He outran the MSU defense to the edge on his 1 touchdown, and then he scored another touchdown later in the game. And then A.J. Henning as well. He only, I believe, had 1 catch for 15 yards, but once again, he showed great burst on the play. And not to focus back on the negatives, but it just blows my mind how they don't go to some of these things that work more often. A.J. Henning touching the ball being the best example. He only played a handful of snaps, and yet he's shined every time he's got an opportunity to do so this season. Even Blake Corum, they're rotating the 4 running backs, but I think he should be a heavier part of that rotation. So there aren't many positive things to take away from this game. I guess one other one is that it is only 1 game, and that Michigan's not going to play as poorly as they did on Saturday all year long. This team is going to play better as the season goes on, you would hope at least. So I guess that's one positive you can look forward to, and it needs to start this Saturday at Indiana.
Absolutely. And, I wrote this week basically, and I've been adamant that this Indiana game absolutely matters, and it is a big game no matter what happened last week. I know a lot of people on our message board, and you see on Twitter, it's like they don't care about this game, whatever. Well, first of all, those guys are going to be, throwing the gasoline on their own, pitchforks and torches, and I guess torch. But if they lose, right, it's going to matter if they lose. It'll be, oh my goodness, the sky's falling even more than it already was last week. You hope if they win, we can take the positives out of it and say that this team did respond from that adversity. And it does suck. You mentioned it earlier about how they needed a wake-up call. And we don't even know, really how they're going to respond yet. But the fact that, they needed a wake-up call to be, to understand that Michigan State can come in and beat you when they've won 9 of the last 13 now. So it's interesting. But yeah, that's that game. Let's move on and focus solely on Indiana and the Michigan-Indiana matchup. Austin, I'm going over some of the numbers. And Indiana, they're not a flashy team. They're not a flashy numbers team. I thought maybe that would be more so what they are. You have really good players on offense, especially at the skill positions. Michael Penix at quarterback, Stevie Scott at running back, Whop Philyor and Ty Freifogel at the wide receiver positions, Peyton Hendershot at tight end. But their numbers are not flashy. They haven't really run the ball really, at a high level. I think the offensive line has been disappointing. So what's your first impression? I guess start with the Indiana offense. And I know you talked to a guy on the other side here this week about Indiana, but your impressions of the Indiana offense through 2 weeks.
Yeah, it all starts with redshirt sophomore quarterback Michael Penix. He was having an outstanding year last year before he got hurt in early November and missed the rest of the season. So he's really got to be the focal point for this Michigan defense on Saturday, because you talked about it, but Indiana has not run the ball at all yet this year. Their rushing numbers are dead last in the Big Ten in several of the most important categories, including total rushing yards and rushing yards per game, and that includes teams like Wisconsin and Nebraska, who have only played one game. Stevie Scott, Indiana's junior running back, is a load at 6'2", 231, but he's been non-existent so far this year. He's only averaging 3.4 yards per carry, which is atrocious nowadays. So it's going to come down to this Indiana passing attack and how they attack Michigan's secondary that was burned last week. Whop Phillier is one of the best receivers in the Big Ten. He had 1,002 yards last year. That was the fourth most in the conference. He's back once again, picking up right where he left off. He has 173 yards. He's a speedster, man, so Michigan's going to have to focus in on him. Jamon Green and Vincent Gray are going to have to play a lot better than they did last Saturday. I do think that we're going to see Don Brown or whoever's calling this Michigan defense this week mix things up. Maybe we'll see Daxton Hill more at corner, or Vincent Gray start the game on the bench and redshirt freshman Jalen Perry in the game more after they put him in the second half last week against MSU. You look at Indiana's box scores, and they were outgained in a big way against Penn State, 488 to 211, and yet they somehow won that game, obviously on Penix's two-point conversion run. They pulled out a 36-35 win in that one, and then, of course, they took care of business last week against Rutgers, winning 37-21. No, Rutgers hung around for most of that game, so this is a good Indiana team. Should they be ranked number 13 in the country? Probably not. I don't think they're the 13th best team or anything like that. They're an inch away from being unranked. I think you could make the case if Penix's two-point conversion against Penn State wasn't successful that they would be unranked right now. But regardless, they are a top 15 team. They're a quality team playing with a lot of confidence at 2-0. This is arguably their best team they've had since 1993. So this is going to be a tough test for Michigan on Saturday. But with all that being said, this is still a Michigan team who we know has a lot of potential. And that's why I'm viewing this game as a toss-up going into it.
Yeah, one thing is for sure. They are going to go after Michigan's corners and see if they have any life left in them. See if they have any confidence left after what happened last week, especially with Vince Gray, who was supposedly your number one corner, and Jim Harbaugh said this week still is their number one corner and their best corner. He didn't look like the best corner against Minnesota. He didn't look like it certainly against Michigan State, and he got benched. But you can't say Jamon Green was any better really against Michigan State, maybe a tad. Then Jalen Perry came in and really struggled as well. So they're going to test them. Nick Sheridan, the offensive coordinator at Indiana, former Michigan quarterback, as we all know, is going to take some shots downfield. And why would you not? With the quarterback you have and the wide receiving core you have and the tight end you have, they're absolutely going to do it. And it's going to be up to Michigan to either adjust defensively, well, probably a combination of both, adjust defensively and have the confidence and, to play how Michigan can. Because we know Vince Gray's a better player than what we saw last week. And we know, even based on week one, that so is Jamon Green. And whether that means Daxton Hill moves over to corner, I don't know. I would do it because I think it's much more important than having a safety if your corners are getting burned, especially in this defense. But we'll see what kind of adjustments Michigan makes. That'll be interesting. On the defensive side of the ball for Indiana, I think Michigan's going to be able to run the ball. I mean, when you look at what they're giving up, 185.5 yards a game on the ground to opponents through 2 games. I think that defensive front is not as good as the secondary, which is pretty elite in my mind. So I think it's going to come down to Michigan running the ball pretty well to be in the game. To win the game, I think Joe Milton's going to have to make some plays, and that's going to be tough against that secondary. That's going to be tough against Tom Allen, who is a really, really good defensive coach. I think he's going to give him some looks to confuse Joe Milton, and I think Michigan State did the same last week. So he's going to take the blueprint, tweak it a little bit, and play to their strengths. But I think it's going to be a close game, Austin. I really do. I think that Michigan's going to have some more heart this week, have some more fight. But is that more important than having more zone or having more adjustments? I don't know. But your impressions, I guess, of what would what we're going to see from this Michigan offense going up against an Indiana defense.
Yeah, they better be able to have success moving the ball against Indiana, because Penn State put up 35 on them, and even Rutgers, who is not expected to have a good offense, put up 21 on them last week. So if Michigan isn't scoring in the mid to upper 20s, that would be a very, very bad sign. And it all just comes down to whether or not Michigan wins this game. There are no moral victories with this team. They need to come out on top. Don Brown, as a defensive coordinator, needs to make significant adjustments on the defensive side of the ball. I think everybody realizes that, including Jim Harbaugh, based on what we've heard this week. As for the offensive side and Joe Milton, one area to keep an eye on is perhaps Joe Milton having success on the ground with his legs. I spoke with Paul Gable, an Indiana insider for the Hoosier.com, and he said that opposing quarterbacks have at times really hurt Indiana with their legs. Sean Clifford, Penn State's redshirt junior quarterback, most significantly, he ran for 119 yards and averaged 7 yards a carry on Indiana in that season opener. So I think it's safe to say Milton's a better runner than Sean Clifford is, but Milton has had 52 and 59 rushing yards, respectively, in Michigan's 2 games this year. So let's see what he does with his legs. I think he showed better pocket presence as the game went on against Michigan State in terms of when to tuck it and run. He admitted that after the game, his feet were busy, as he worded it. And he really, again, showed better pocket presence as the game went on. Jim Harbaugh said the same thing after the game. We focus so much on the negatives lately, but man, let me throw out another positive. It's supposed to be 72 degrees and sunny with no chance of rain and 5-mile-an-hour wind gusts in Bloomington, Indiana this weekend. So it's going to be an unusually warm November day and really perfect conditions for Big Ten football. I know a lot of people like the cold fall weather for Big Ten football, low 50s, upper 40s, rain at times, and I like it too. But man, I can't complain with low 70s and sunny in late November for Big Ten football, because that's almost unheard of in this part of the country for this time of year.
Seriously, I'd take that all day, and it's perfect weather for Joe Milton to throw the ball 90 yards downfield on some deep balls like we need to see. I think they need to take some more shots downfield, because the formula's out there where Indiana's going to run blitz and make Joe Milton do some things with his arm, which we know he's capable of doing. We've seen it. We just want to see a little more of it. We want to see a little more of it downfield, and that will be certainly a storyline. If Michigan gets the downfield passing attack going like they really haven't in the first 2 weeks, then I think this is going to be a Michigan win. At the same time, like I said, we haven't seen it. So, they're going to have to win and maybe gut out a win in another way, but I think this one's going to come down to the wire. What do we expect from Michigan? Possible changes. First of all, some of the injuries with Jalen Mayfield at right tackle getting banged up. His X-ray came back negative immediately after the game, but again, it looked like an ankle type situation. So, he would be questionable for this game. When you look at the linebackers, Cam McGrone, he came out of the game. Jim Harbaugh said he wanted to come back in, but didn't get cleared by the doctors. Michael Barrett came out of the game last week. So we could see some new guys in there, but really, I think Michigan can win this game if they execute more than they did, sustain some more drives on offense. Obviously, you can't get torched on defense, but most of all, come with that energy and intensity that you would expect out of not only a Michigan team or really any team in college football, but a team that expects to win, and you would expect out of a team that expects to be really good, like they thought they would be coming into the season.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see several personnel changes on Saturday, not just from an injury standpoint. I wouldn't be surprised if we see one of the starting cornerbacks benched and start the game on the bench. And like I said, maybe they move Daxton Hill down to that corner spot. I wouldn't be surprised also if one or two of these injured guys do miss the game, whether that's Cam McGrone or Jalen Mayfield or Michael Barrett, or even if McGrone's healthy, if Adam Shibley, the redshirt junior walk-on who filled in pretty well for McGrone after he got hurt last Saturday, if he comes out, because a lot of people thought he was the best defensive player on Saturday, which is just crazy to think about. But it's obvious they need to make some of these changes, because some of these guys who aren't playing with the appropriate intensity can have a seat on the bench for all I'm concerned. I think we'll see a change or two on the offensive line as well. I don't want to go too much into detail, but it was clear that some of these guys were not ready for the moment last Saturday against Michigan State, and as a result, they need to take a seat on the bench. Jim Harbaugh has talked about a meritocracy his entire tenure here, and I really think that was the case during his first 2 or 3 years here in Ann Arbor, but it feels like he's gotten away from that a little bit in recent years, and we need to start seeing it again, beginning this week, if a guy isn't performing up to par, then he needs to take a seat on the bench, and some of these other guys need to get their opportunity if they're playing with more intensity and if they're executing at a higher level.
And almost more important than any personnel changes is the adjustments. I mean, don't you go into a game with a game plan and then you realize once you get punched in the face, like Mike Tyson says, that you have some sort of things in your back pocket? I mean, every plan's great till you get punched in the face, Austin. I mean, so they have to come in with a better game plan. Like, that's just flat out, like, and if the game plan was 2 pages last week, it's got to be 4, because there has to be contingency plans for something that happens. If you leave your corners on an island again, then and they start getting torched, you have to have something else to do. If you're not getting any pressure, you have to figure out something else and pick your poison in another way. Same thing on offense. If you're not running the ball successfully between the tackles, you have to do something else. So the adjustments are going to be huge too. I don't even care who's on the field at this point. At some point, you got to adjust to what's happening in this game. And Tom Allen has a hell of a blueprint that was laid out last week by Mel Tucker and staff.
Yeah, words of wisdom from Clayton Sayfie, folks. I couldn't agree more with you on that one. Don Brown failed to make the appropriate adjustments last week against MSU. Michigan's defensive line not getting any pressure on Rocky Lombardi went hand in hand with the corners getting beat deep consistently, and vice versa. If that front seven gets the kind of pressure that we've seen them get before on Lombardi, then Michigan's corners obviously aren't hanging out on an island as long as they were. The two go hand in hand. And once we saw that it wasn't working, as a coordinator, as Don Brown, you have to make those adjustments. And I think it was pretty obvious that he didn't do that last week. But again, based on what we've heard, I think we're going to see a slightly different game plan, at least this Saturday in Bloomington, or at least we better, because Indiana's receivers and quarterback are both better than what Michigan State had last week. I don't think there's any question Michael Penix is a better quarterback than Rocky Lombardi was. And Indiana's group of receivers and Watt Fillier and Ty Freifogel and Javon Swinton, I think, are better than what MSU had and Jaden Reed and Ricky White and those other MSU receivers. So I'm anxious to see how Michigan responds defensively on Saturday. That's perhaps the thing that I'm going to be keeping the closest eye on. And specifically, whether Don Brown fixes what needs to be fixed, because this is not trending in a good direction, man. The backlash publicly has been very bad this past week, and it's only going to get louder and louder if Michigan's defense gets burned once again this weekend.
Yeah, and with all that being said, I actually do believe that they're going to make some adjustments and ones that are going to work. Chris Ballas, our senior editor, wrote in his Keys to the Game that they need to make some adjustments, the ones we're talking about, possibly some more zone, some more safeties over the top to help these corners, and then offense, obviously, some of the things we've talked about as well, with not only rotationing, the rotation of the running backs, but where you're running the football, who you're leaning on, et cetera, et cetera. But don't overcorrect. He gave the example of a game under Rich Rod when they went down to Purdue and lost, and how they made some changes and had other people, figure out the game plan that week, and it didn't work, and you lose in an embarrassing way. So, it's weird in the season in week 3 to say that they have to overhaul everything. I don't think that's the right thing to do. At the same time, you have to do quite a bit. Whether that's just being more willing to use plays and formations and, looks that you already have in your, play sheet, or that's coming up with some new things. But it's week 3. And you weren't planning on doing this if you're, Don Brown. At least it doesn't seem like he was planning on being a completely different style of defense than he has been in years past, despite the deficiency at corner. But, at that point, it's like, well, then you thought wrong, and, you should make some changes. So, thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out how much success these Michigan coaches have had in the past. People love to criticize these guys, as we are doing right now, and they deserve it this week at least. But man, it's not like these guys just forgot how to coach football. Jim Harbaugh has taken an NFL team to a Super Bowl, and he turned Stanford from the Pac-10 at the time doormat into a 12-win program in just a few short years. And Don Brown has had success everywhere he's been. He finished with 3 straight top 3 defenses at Michigan. Josh Gaddis, you look at what he did at Alabama, Penn State, and Western Michigan. These guys know how to coach football, and they've had tremendous success in the past. And that's why the struggles this team is going through right now just absolutely baffles me. I can't figure it out. I don't know if it's stubbornness. I don't know if the game is changing and they're not willing to change with it. I think that could be the case to a certain degree with Don Brown, but it's clear that you have to make appropriate changes. Stubbornness, I think, is another word that you can throw in here in this situation. And we're really going to learn a lot, not only about this Michigan team, but about these coaches over the next several weeks and the adjustments they make and whether or not they can still redeem this 2020 football season.
Absolutely. And I will make clear, I'm not criticizing these coaches as people, but I'm criticizing what I saw last Saturday. And I think, you are as well. These are by all means like really good people, really good coaches. And that's what makes it almost even more unacceptable, I guess, last week, because we know they're good coaches. So, if you're watching this, if you're an observer like we are, some answers seem clear. Some seem like that there's, things that maybe a football expert like some of the guys in those building will have to figure out. But, it's clear that some changes need to be made, and that happens throughout the course of a season. After a loss, you look in the mirror, see what you need to do different, and you do it. And we'll see what Michigan does next week or this weekend in Bloomington. A beautiful day, like you mentioned. That's one of the positives here, Austin, the 72-degree weather. So that will be, we will be learning a ton about this Michigan team. Let's get to our Big Ten power rankings, which will be very interesting. We did not tell each other before the show who's where. We did reveal a couple of them because we were talking about where Northwestern is and things like that. But I'm interested to hear yours, Austin. Before that, I do want to remind people that this podcast is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. With interest rates below 3%, there's never been a better time to lock in a low, fixed interest rate on your mortgage. You'll never need to think about refinancing again. Set it and forget it. And with JFQ Lending, you're guaranteed to get the highest level of customer service. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and over 3,000 5-star reviews. Give Chris Sabanish a call today at 480-562-6267 or email him directly at csabanish@jfqlending.com. That's CSABANOSH@jfqlending.com. JFQ Lending Incorporated, equal access lender, licensed in over 40 states. www.jfqlending.com. Big Ten power rankings. Austin, you want to go first? What do you got?
Absolutely. I think people are going to laugh quite a bit at these because in a lot of ways they don't really make any sense. I threw records out the window and just simply based it on simply who I think is better. There's no rhyme or reason to it, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out there, starting at number 14 and making my way up. At 14, and as the worst team in the Big Ten, I have Illinois. I have Maryland at number 13, Minnesota at 12. Michigan's win over them is not looking as good as it once did, especially after they lost to Maryland last Friday night. I have Michigan State at 11, Rutgers at 10. I have Michigan at number 9, Iowa at 8, Purdue at 7, Nebraska at 6, Indiana at 5, Penn State at number 4, despite being 0-2, Northwestern at number 3, who has been arguably the biggest surprise in the entire Big Ten this season, Wisconsin at number 2, and then Ohio State at number 1. That top 2 was pretty easy, but man, when you look at number 3 through 9 or so, I think a lot of these teams are interchangeable, and it's really hard to rank a lot of these teams based on only 2 weeks and what we've seen so far this year.
2 questions. Can you explain to me Penn State over Indiana, and can you explain to me Minnesota over Maryland?
Sure. I think the notion that you have to rank one team ahead of another simply because they beat that team is incredibly overrated. Like I said, Penn State was an inch away from beating Indiana if Penix doesn't get that 2-point conversion. We've seen it so many times in the past. A terrible Nebraska team beat Michigan State in 2015, the year MSU went to the playoff. That did not mean that Nebraska was better. Or in 2016, when Michigan lost at night at Iowa, that didn't mean that Iowa was better. So that's why I have Penn State ahead of Indiana and Minnesota ahead of Maryland.
Fair. I guess I'll go 14-1 then myself. I also have Illinois as the worst team right now in the Big Ten at 14. Then I have Minnesota 13, Iowa at 12. 0-2 Iowa team. Maryland at 11. Michigan State at 10. Rutgers at 9. Nebraska at 8. Purdue at 7. Penn State at 6. Michigan at 5. I'd actually, second thought, I would put Penn State above Michigan there. Northwestern at 4. Indiana at 3. Wisconsin at my number 2 spot. And then, of course, Ohio State at number 1. Do you have any, grill me on mine, I guess. Do you have any questions for me?
Man, making changes on the fly. It doesn't sound like your rankings are very concrete. So you have Michigan in that number 6 spot, despite last weekend's performance?
I do.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's a significant drop-off after Michigan and before Purdue, Nebraska, Rutgers, Michigan State. At the same time, it's not, I guess, as big as I once thought, because Michigan State's down there at 10 or whatever it is, and, they obviously beat Michigan. But, I do think that there's a drop-off. I think if Michigan and Purdue were to play, despite what's happened here and Purdue posting a 2-0 record through 2 weeks, I'd go with Michigan big.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out again how difficult it is to rank these teams. When we're ranking Michigan, for example, do we base it more on the team we saw at Minnesota that looked dominant, or do we base it more on the team that looked terrible last week against MSU? You could say the same thing about MSU. They looked atrocious against Rutgers, and then they played a respectable game, I suppose, against Michigan. So again, only 2 weeks under our belts, and it's so hard to rank some of these teams. There's really no right or wrong answers at this point. I think Ohio State at number 1 is pretty obvious, and putting Wisconsin at number 2 was an easy choice as well. But man, after that, so many of these teams are interchangeable, and we really won't learn more about a lot of these teams until we hit late November, early December, and a lot of these schools have 5 or 6 games under their belt by that point.
Is the team we saw at Minnesota different than the team we saw against Michigan State? Because Minnesota is, garbage.
Yeah. Minnesota's terrible.
I wanted to put that in nicer terms, but they're bad.
There's no sugarcoating it. They gave up well over 600 yards to a bad Maryland offense and lost to a bad Maryland team last Friday. So Minnesota is obviously terrible. With that being said, yeah, I do think it was 2 different Michigan teams, because the Michigan team that came out and pounded Minnesota was a confident Michigan team who played with energy and emotion, and it was the opposite this past weekend. If that Michigan team that played MSU this past weekend would have showed up against Minnesota, then I think Minnesota would have won. So I do think it is a huge difference. And who is the true Michigan team? I think that's kind of the $1 million question right now. As of now, I would say it's a team that's somewhere in the middle of that. Not quite as bad as the one we saw against MSU, but not quite as good as the one we saw against Minnesota in the season opener.
And we'll learn a lot Saturday, as we've been saying. So Big Ten Power Rankings presented by JFQ Lending. So thank you to JFQ Lending. Let's get to our college football picks. We got 4 games to pick. And welcome back, by the way, to the MAC. We had some action last night. I believe we have some again tonight, or maybe they just played all on Wednesday night. Not exactly sure. Welcome back to the Pac-12. Beautiful to have them back, especially for some late night games where you just don't want college football to end on your Saturday night. So welcome back to every conference in FBS football, making the right choice and playing football this season. We'll start with Michigan State at Iowa. Iowa 7-point favorites. I've got the Hawkeyes here to win this game by more than a touchdown. Austin, what do you got?
I'm in the same boat. I've got Iowa winning by anywhere from 7 to 14 points. I think it'll be a fairly tight game throughout, but man, we still can't forget about what MSU did against Rutgers in that season opener and how bad they looked. I know Iowa's 0-2, but they've had 2 nail-biters. They lost to Purdue right in the last minute, and then they lost by 1 point to Northwestern last week, so they could easily be 2-0. I still think this is a fairly decent Iowa team, and I'd be surprised if they lost at home to MSU this weekend.
Nebraska at Northwestern. Northwestern, 3.5-point favorites. I really like this Northwestern team. I've always kind of liked Pat Fitzgerald, especially in the last few years. And then I think them having a competent quarterback in Peyton Ramsey has really elevated them. But give credit to that defense and how good Pat Fitzgerald has them playing after a couple bad years in Evanston. I'm going to go, with all that said, I'm going to go with Nebraska to cover 3.5. I think that Nebraska is a talented team. I think that obviously their game last week got canceled, and then they had a tough challenge. They actually hung in there a little bit early with Ohio State, so I think that they're revved up. They're ready to go. They're ready to play a game. They tried to schedule Chattanooga last week after Wisconsin got canceled. I'm going to say the Huskers come in and beat Northwestern in an empty Kyle Field.
Wow, we couldn't disagree more on this one. I think that 3.5 point spread is way too low. I'm super high on this Northwestern team. I wouldn't be surprised if they win this one by 10 or 14 points. I think they're going to control the game throughout. I agree with you that Nebraska, to a degree, is a team on the rise, especially after watching them at Ohio State. They hung with the Buckeyes for a lot of that game, and the final score was not indicative of how close that game actually was. But again, Northwestern has been the biggest surprise in the entire Big Ten to me so far this year, and what a difference a quarterback makes. We're seeing that in fifth-year senior transfer Peyton Ramsey, who came in from Indiana, and he's made all the difference for Pat Fitzgerald's team so far this year. So picking Northwestern to win and cover is really an easy choice for me this weekend.
All right. I hope it happens. I like Northwestern. I had nothing bad to say about Northwestern. I have something bad to say about Clemson. I don't like them very much. Clemson at Notre Dame. No Trevor Lawrence for Clemson, but Notre Dame is 5.5-point underdogs in South Bend. I don't know. I think we're all going to be stupid if we sit here and pick Notre Dame. We're going to, think that we're all stupid on Sunday morning. I'm not going to overthink it. I'm just going to say Clemson, was going to win by like 21 if Trevor Lawrence was playing, or 28 or something like that. I'm high on this Clemson team. I haven't been overly impressed by Notre Dame this year, and that it'll be closer because he's not in there. Maybe a 10-point game, but I'm going to go Clemson to cover 5.5 here.
I agree that Clemson probably would have won by 14 or 17 or so if Trevor Lawrence was playing, but he's obviously not. Freshman DJ Uiagalelei will get the start, and he actually played outstanding last week against Boston College. His numbers were great, and yet Clemson as a team almost lost that game. They couldn't run the ball, but even with Uiagalelei at quarterback, I've got Clemson winning this one. I think it'll be fairly tight. I think they'll win by 7 or 10, but yeah, I just can't pick Notre Dame to win this game, especially after how sloppy they've looked in some of their games this past year, specifically against Louisville and Florida State. So give me Clemson by 10 or so.
What's Clemson's quarterback name again?
DJ Uiagalelei. He was a 5-star, and he was, I believe, the number 4 player in the country out of high school.
Yeah, no, I know. I just wanted to hear you say it. That's beautiful pronunciation.
Thank you. I've had a lot of practice over the last few years. He was obviously a high school sensation, so him bursting onto the scene is really nothing new for anybody who follows recruiting.
One more time. What's the name?
DJ Uiagalelei.
It's great.
Thanks.
Stanford at Oregon, our last game in honor of the Pac-12. This one will be 7:30 on ABC. Oregon is 8-point favorites against Stanford. Oregon's actually a team I had in my preseason Final Four way back early summer, midsummer, when we did our college football or our Michigan football preview magazine. And within that, our college football preview, I had Oregon in there. I actually like this Oregon team. I think their defense is going to be good once again. I think you pronounced this quarterback's name Tyler Shuck. It's spelled kind of weird, but I think that he's going to be good. He was a highly rated recruit out of high school as well. I'm riding with Oregon to win this game, and if there's any Oregon natives out there listening, I think we do have one at least. He's going to get mad at me for pronouncing it Oregon, but that's how I was born. That's how I was brought up. That's how you say it.
Yeah, I believe the guy you're talking about told us to pronounce it as organ, like a body part or a musical instrument, which just sounds weird. So I'm sticking with Oregon. I think they win by 10 or 14 or more. That spread is way too low on this one. The Justin Herbert era is over in Eugene. And like you said, Tyler Shuck is now the man in charge, spelled Shough. It looks like it should be show or shach if you want to put that goofy sound on the end. But Michigan actually recruited this guy. He was a 4-star out of high school. He obviously wound up at Oregon. But as for the Stanford side of things, this program has been trending downward in recent years. They were terrible last year. David Shaw really hit the ground running when he took over with Jim Harbaugh's guys after Harbaugh left following that 2010 season. So It's starting to look like David Shaw might not be that good of a coach. After all, like you said, the Pac-12 kicking off this weekend. It's good to have them back. Oregon Stanford is the headliner out there, but USC Arizona State, I think worth pointing out, is starting at noon Eastern time, which of course is 9 a.m. Pacific time. So that's going to be weird for the locals playing a football game at 9 a.m. out there. A lot of people thought the Michigan-Washington game on September 5th, if it would have occurred, would have been played at 9 a.m. as well. So it sucks for the people on the West Coast, but man, that's awesome for us people out east having Pac-12 football kicking off right away at 12 o'clock Eastern time, not long after we wake up.
Yeah, there'll be nothing else on at noon, right? So you'll be watching Pac-12?
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, I don't know what other games are on at noon. So
No team that we cover at all. Also, by the way, it's David Shuck.
Oh, yeah, S-H-A-W is pronounced Shuck too, apparently. So thanks for clarifying that one.
Yeah, there we go. David Shuck and Stanford. All right, those are our college football picks. We'll quickly end with our over-unders. Austin, each and every week, the Michigan-Indiana point total is set at 54.5. I have the under here. What do you got?
Under. I think both teams score in the 20s. I wouldn't be surprised if neither team hits 30. I'm not going to say who I think will win the game. We'll have that in Chris Ballas' staff picks article tomorrow, but I've got something like a 28-24 or 27-20 final score.
Yeah, it's going to be a really close game, but I agree with you that it's going to be tad under that number. So I'm going to go with the under. 150 rushing yards for Michigan. We mentioned earlier in the show that Indiana's allowing 185.5 rushing yards per game through 2 weeks. Small sample size, but their front seven has not looked very strong. I'm going to go over on rushing yards. I think Michigan is going to run the ball well and move the football there. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I think it is going to come down to Joe Milton's arm on whether or not they actually win a tight game. So I'll go over 150 rushing yards.
I'll go slightly over as well. I'm not confident in this pick, especially after watching how poorly the rushing attack played last Saturday. But I think they're due for a bounce-back effort. Hopefully a Charbonnet or a Haskins or a Corum or somebody rips off a long run or two in this one like we saw them do against Minnesota. So I'm going to slightly take the over on this one.
Okay, and then my last one, this is slightly depressing. 5.5 Indiana passes for 15-plus yards. So Michigan State had 9 last week against Michigan, including 5 that went for 30 yards or more, which is crazy to even say out loud. I have under slightly. I think Michigan's going to make some adjustments. At the same time, 9 is super high in any sort of game. I think they'll have like 4 or 5, but I'm going to go this under 5.5 passes for Indiana of over 15 yards or 15 yards or more.
I'll say slightly over. I could see it going either way, but with just how many times they got burned deep last Saturday, I do think they'll make some adjustments, but at the same time, I still think Indiana's passing attack is significantly better than MSU's was, and the receivers are better. So I think it's going to be slightly over, but to end on a positive note, how about Jamon Green and his 5 pass breakups? Those 5 pass breakups lead the Big Ten this year, so hopefully he's doing something right in that corner spot.
Wow, I didn't know that. I mean,
Yeah.
He's had some good plays. I mean, he's got to be more consistent, but he wasn't the biggest problem at corner last week. Another positive, I guess, for Jamon Green. That is our show for this week. That's the Maize and Blue Breakdown. We will obviously have a ton of post-game coverage from the Michigan-Indiana game, win or lose. Check us out at thewolverine.com. Use the promo code BLUE60 to get your first 60 days of our premium content for free. Rate us 5 stars, subscribe on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you're using. Leave us a review. We read those, so we'd appreciate that. Follow us on Twitter at The Wolverine Mag. Like us on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/The Wolverine Magazine. Subscribe on YouTube. Just search The Wolverine or go to youtube.com/The Wolverine Video. We'll see everybody next week.